Hey everyone, welcome into an all-new episode of the American Mailbag alongside Andy Gresh. I'm Haley Outen. Andy, another week, another bag of mail. You ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. First question comes from James Cox. He wants to know, what is the biggest concern for his UCF Knights in terms of overall play this year? They're obviously coming off that loss on the road at Cincinnati.
Well, it was really turnovers that hurt them against Cincinnati, and I think it's that. If you're going to have some change in the quarterback position every once in a while, it's making sure you're taking care of the football. That's a team issue. That's a skill position issue, and it really was the reason, in my mind, why UCF lost to Cincinnati.
All right, well, over at Memphis, Josh Evans wants to know, if Memphis runs the table and goes undefeated with an American championship, will they overtake Boise State in the polls due to their weak conference?
You know, so what he's asking me to do is to predict what the rubes, who don't give the AAC enough credit anyway and give the American enough credit, and what they're going to do. It would be right there, because along the way there would be a win over SMU. There would be good victories there for Memphis. So I think yes would be the answer, because I would like to think that these people who are voting and, you know, everyone in college football would look at the champion of the American Athletic Conference as someone who deserves a spot in a New Year's Six Bowl, if not being in the conversation nationally. That said, there's going to be a 0 in the right-hand column. If there isn't, I think it definitely gets held against the American by those voters.
Well, Boise sitting at 14 in both national polls, Memphis at 23 in the AP and 20 in the coaches. But as we know, the real poll coming out here pretty soon with the college football playoff.
Well, and Haley, I also think, too, that the American West is setting up to where there's going to be some good wins for whomever survives that side of the American Athletic Conference.
All right, moving on, Jason Chigoy. He wants to know, would you say that Tulane is now in the conversation with winning the American?
Yeah, they're there. Look, you look at their record, they're 4-1. They've beaten some good teams along the way. And what we've seen from Tulane is the constant build from Willie Fritz from when he first got here. And it looks like the same old Willie Fritz. He takes over a program, he finds a way to build it, he plays young guys. Next thing you know, a couple years later, they're a contender. Tulane is very live for the conference title. It's really, when you think about those teams in the West, Haley, SMU, Memphis, Tulane, they're now battling it out to play maybe Cincinnati out of the East for what would be a heck of a conference championship game.
Well, Tulane now 4-1 for the first time since 1998, so great start for the Green Wave this year. All right, moving on, Glenn Phillips, he wants to know, with UCF being down, they have 2 losses this year.
Yeah, I know, right? Oh, how terrible of them.
How many teams can win the conference championship? He's figuring in Memphis, Cincinnati, Temple, but not counting out UCF yet. But he doesn't feel like SMU has enough horses in this race. LOL. Let's add that in.
I think SMU is very live to run the table. That matchup they're going to have ultimately against Memphis may end up being for not only conference supremacy, but sort of standing out in terms of the national spotlight. So I've become a believer in SMU. They're getting really good quarterback play. James Prochet is playing out of his mind right now. So you have to look at SMU and what they've done. They've tested, they've won on the road. I like SMU a lot. To me, they're every bit as good as Memphis. Tulane's in that conversation as well. So, no, I think SMU, well, now they're going to be tested coming up, there's no question, but they have enough to win this conference championship.
From Terry Webster, she says, it looks like UC is a lock in the East now. Who comes out of the West? Pony up.
Wow,
be an SMU
right,
fan.
So it's an SMU fan. And again, I think it's down to those 3. If I were to lean one of 2 or 2 of the 3, I think Memphis and SMU are maybe a little further ahead than Tulane right now. But Justin McMillan's got a great record as a starting quarterback at Tulane. You can't take Tulane for granted. But to me, the way I see it, it's going to be Cincinnati. And I was wrong on that Cincinnati-UCF game. Since he did a great job of turning UCF over a ton, I think it's Cincinnati on one side and then either Memphis or SMU on the other side of the American.
Let's talk national polls. Josh Carter says 7 American teams received votes in the coaches poll this week. What does that say about the depth and parity in this conference?
Well, I think what it does, Haley, is sort of reminds us that if you're an institution that can leave your coach in place for a while, you can get great results, right? So we started to see the transiency at Houston a little bit, and we've seen them slide down. You know, Temple, who I should say, Temple is one of those teams in the East that teams are going to have to get through. But, I look at their schedule and who they played, and it's been very much up and down. I don't quite exactly know, even though the numbers look good, I don't know how great the Temple defense is. But the change in head coach, it kind of hurt their record a little bit in the consistency. So I think what SMU and what Tulane is proving, and Mike Norvell in at Memphis, is that if you can get your head coach in there and you can get him to stay there for a while, that's going to raise the depth in the American Athletic Conference. And I think we're seeing that this year.
Temple and Cincinnati in the East, both 1-0, so still a lot can happen.
Of course, no question. But I think people are going to start to focus on the West because Memphis and SMU is coming on like wildfire.
From Ted Kaiser, he says, with UC, Memphis, and SMU in the top 25, along with Tulane and UCF getting votes, where do you think the American rates among the Power 6 conferences?
Well, I think they're better than the Pac-12, right? So, I know we have the Big Ten, we have the SEC, the ACC is further ahead. I think they're fifth in what they think is a 5-horse race when it's really 6. So the American is squarely fixed themselves and interjected themselves into the national discussion, not only with what they've done against Group of 5 teams, but also how they've acquitted themselves in non-conference as well. Look, this league just continues to grow and grow and grow every year. And whether it's UCF or Cincinnati or Memphis or now maybe SMU, which would be a great comeback story, there are a lot of teams in the American that deserve national attention.
From Luke Michelle, he says, do you believe Cincinnati is the best American team, and do you think they make a New Year's Six bowl this year?
Whoa, they would have to win the conference then. Their only loss would be to Ohio State. So I think they're one of those teams that could be standing there in the end. That said, I'm looking Cincinnati, Memphis, SMU. One of those teams, to me, I think will get to a New Year's Six bowl. Look, the hard part of this is you got to go through 12 games, then you got to win a conference championship, and you got to try to have a 0 in the right-hand column. That's not easy to do. I think a one-loss American team would still get into the New Year's Six. I think what folks who are fans of the American have to do is sort of root for the conference and root for when there are some crossover games with some of the supposed Power Fives, that they get as many wins as they can. Let's elevate the conference up as a whole. That'll make it easier to get one of those teams into a New Year's Six.
All right, Will Sports, he wants to know, are you as happy as him that there are 3 teams in the top 25 this week? Tell us your feelings.
Yeah, and I think there should be more. And look, I would hope that these rubes across college football are noticing what's going on in the American. I think on the East Coast, people are starting to get it. I think in the West Coast, they're still maybe lagging behind. So, again, just go out and win football games. That's what the American needs to do. And when you have a Memphis versus SMU, hope that there's zeros in the right-hand column so it really cranks up the anticipation for a game that big.
All right, let's talk Houston. Pete Mays says his Cougars are going to face 3 top 25 teams in the coming weeks. What will it take for them to come up with some wins? They have a new face at quarterback.
Yeah, they do, and they're going to need to score points. It's that simple because defensively, we know that Houston is down this year. They lose Ed Oliver. They're just not as good as they were last year. So, to me, it's got to be score points and possess the football and maybe cross your fingers because I think it just might be one of those transition years at Houston under Dana Holgorsen.
From David Wendt, what will it take for the Green Wave to maintain its current win streak against UConn this week?
Show up and run the ball. Really. You look at UConn, they're a wounded animal right now inside the American Athletic Conference. So if you're Tulane, just go be you. Go show up, run it, possess it 32 minutes. The rest will take care of itself.
Here's your guy, Andy. Nick Mill,
Meek
a.k.a.
Mill.
There
Hello,
you go.
Meek.
In your opinion, which of the American football team's non-conference games and results shocked you the most this year that have been played up to this point?
And I know it's going to come across as a negative, but Cincinnati getting handled the way they did by Ohio State, I thought they were a little farther along. I know it was going to be a tall task to go into the horseshoe and get a win, but when you look at how far Luke Fickell's team has come, you're like, wait a minute, they're not a 42-0 or whatever whatever the margin of victory turned out to be. There's not that big a difference between Cincinnati and Ohio State. I think Cincinnati ended up having a bad day. That one stood out because, unfortunately, Haley, for a lot of those who don't want to do their homework about the American, the stodgy, ink-stained sports writer would just be like, oh, look at that score, blah, 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 not taking into account how early it was in the year and how far Cincinnati will have come along.
Well, what better way to end the show than by talking about some barbecue? That conversation really seemed to get the people going.
I love it.
Last week from Calvin Pollard. Do you want to come to the Houston Livestock Show and
Yes.
Rodeo Barbecue Cook-Off so you can take back what you said about Memphis and Texas barbecue?
Haley, if this has proven anything, this shows that this show, A, may need to go on the road every once in a while, and B, we can get ourselves fed pretty much weekly if we go to the right stops. So to me, what I'm taking away from this is people are throwing invites out to us. Why can't we just set up shop out there?
Let's go. Let's go.
That's
We're
right.
taking the American
Sure.
Mailbag on the road.
All I have to do is get on a plane. You're the one that's going to deal with all the logistics, so I'm down.
All right. Well, we're going to add that to our schedule. I think that would be some time well spent.
Yeah, of course. Go out and hang out with the fans.
What better way to learn more about the American Conference than to taste test our way through this great country?
That would be amazing, right? Because there's North Carolina barbecue. I'm sure someone in Florida is going to jump up and be like, hey, man, we got stuff down here, too. So we can hit Orlando, you can go to North Carolina, you can go to Dallas, SMU, you get Memphis in there as well. And then you can flip it up and have like cheesesteaks in Philadelphia. I don't know, I guess you'd have lobster at Yukon or whatever.
This is pretty impressive. Rattle off every city in the American.
Sure. I
Here
don't
you
know
go.
the teams in the American, but you connected to food and I'm pretty good. I remember that stuff.
Well, we clearly discuss it all on this show, so whether you have questions about football, food, whatever it may be, make sure to keep submitting them each and every week using the hashtag AskAndyFB. We'll find your questions Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to join us on the American Huddle Thursday night. On behalf of Andy Gresham, Haley Otten, we'll see you then.